The year is 1623. Somewhere in the heart of Europe, far from the courts of kings or the noise of armies, there lies a village whose name has been swallowed by time. It had no real reason to be remembered. It was not the site of a great battle or a glittering festival. It was simply there. A cluster of wooden homes, a church bell that rang every Sunday, and a stream that wound its way lazily through the meadow like a ribbon left behind by a wandering child.
And yet, for a few centuries, villages like this one became the stage for a curious kind of drama, the fear of witchcraft. But before we step into the whispers and the accusations, before we hear the words Sabbath or pact with the devil, let us first walk slowly through the village as the sun begins to set and see what life was like before the fear took hold. The dying light of day. Imagine, if you will, the late afternoon sun dipping toward the horizon. The sky is not yet dark, but the light has shifted from bright gold to the softer hue of fading fire. Shadows stretch long across the dirt paths between the houses. You might hear the wooden wheel of a cart creaking its way back from the fields, pulled by a tired horse whose day has been just as long as any man's. The air smells of wood smoke from the hearths, where suppers are already being prepared. Stews of barley and onions, perhaps with a scrap of pork if the family has done well that week. There is bread too, hard at the edges but warm in the center, pulled from clay ovens whose designs have not changed much since the Romans walked the earth. Children's laughter drifts faintly from the edge of the meadow, where they chase one another until a mother's voice calls them in. Chickens wander near the doorsteps, pecking hopefully at whatever the day has left behind. At this hour, the village feels neither busy nor still. It breathes. It settles. It belongs to no one in particular, a place caught between work and rest, day and night. The rhythm of ordinary lives. For most people here, life follows the rhythms of season and soil. The men spend their days behind plows or swinging scythes through tall grass. The women tend gardens, fetch water, and sew by the firelight that will soon replace the sun. Children help when they are old enough, and run wild when they are not. And above all of them, the church bell keeps time. It rings for morning prayers, for weddings, for the rare funeral when someone slips away. Though, in truth, death is no stranger here. Fevers come in the winter, and sometimes in the summer, too. A bad harvest can mean thin faces by spring. Life is not easy, but it is predictable in the way the seasons are predictable. Or so it seems, because every so often something happens that does not feel predictable. A cow gives no milk, a child falls ill, a storm shreds the wheat fields overnight. And because people do not yet have the words for germs or atmospheric pressure, because science has not yet pried open the mysteries of the natural world, explanations are often sought elsewhere, sometimes in the shadows. The first lanterns. As dusk deepens, one by one the lanterns appear. They are simple things, a candle inside a glass frame, or sometimes just an open flame trembling in the wind. From a distance, the village begins to look like a cluster of fireflies gathered on the ground. But firelight changes the way the world looks. Shadows grow bolder. The edges of familiar things blur. A tree that looked friendly in the daylight becomes, in the half-seen world of evening, a looming figure with too many arms. It is in this hour that people's imaginations begin to stir. The same path they walked that morning feels different when the wind rattles the hedges, and the only light comes from the thin glow of a lantern in someone's hand. It is no surprise, then, that stories begin to gather here like mist. Stories by the fire. Inside the houses, families huddle near the hearth. The fire crackles. Bread is broken. Someone begins to speak. Perhaps it is the grandfather, his voice rough with age and smoke. Perhaps it is the mother, turning the spindle in her hands as she talks. But sooner or later, the stories come. They speak of saints who walked the earth long ago and of things far less holy. They whisper of travelers who saw strange lights in the forest of neighbors who muttered to themselves at odd hours, of children who wandered too far into the hills and came back different somehow. No one truly believes all of it, and yet no one entirely disbelieves it either, because the world beyond the firelight is very dark. The edge of the fields. If you were to leave the circle of houses and follow the path toward the edge of the fields, you would notice how quickly the sense of safety falls away. The fields themselves are quiet now, the day's work finished. But beyond them lies the forest, and the forest at night feels like another world altogether. Its branches knit the moonlight into strange shapes. Its roots make the path uneven. People here do not often travel after dark unless they must. Bandits are one danger, wolves another. But there is also the sense, unspoken, half-felt, that the night belongs to things older than men with plows and churches. Things that do not like to be watched. A world without certainty. Today we live with electric lights, with maps, with explanations for eclipses and comets, and the illnesses that sweep through families without warning. But in the 1600s, the world was full of mysteries. Why did storms come when they did? Why did some infants live and others not? Why did one neighbor's crops wither while another's thrived? Sometimes the answer was simply chance. Sometimes it was the will of God. But sometimes, just sometimes, people looked for other causes. And when they looked, they often found them close to home. Before the fear took hold. At this point in our evening walk through the village, no one has yet spoken the word witch. Not tonight, not yet. The women spinning wool by the fire are just women. The midwife who helped deliver half the children in the village is respected, even if people sometimes whisper that she knows too many herbs too well. The hunched figure who gathers sticks at the forest's edge is simply old, not yet someone to fear. But the ingredients are here. The stories, the darkness, the unexplainable turns of fortune. All it will take is one bad harvest, one sick child, one frightened preacher with a talent for words. And this village, like hundreds of others, will begin to look at itself differently. Tonight, though, the lanterns glow softly. The bread is warm. The wind rattles the shutters, but goes no further. For now, life is ordinary. For now,
The year is still 1623. The village lies under a thin quilt of mist this morning. The fields are pale with dew. A single cock crows somewhere beyond the hedges, the sound carrying across the still air. Life stirs slowly here. Bread is baked. Water is drawn from the well. Children rub sleep from their eyes and chase one another down the path before anyone tells them to fetch wood instead. The rhythms of the day begin again. But there is one rhythm, one figure, that keeps to its own time. While most villagers rise and rest with the sun, there are some whose days are ruled by plants rather than by prayers. Women, mostly women, who walk the fields long after harvest season ends, who dry leaves above the hearth where others would hang laundry, who murmur not to saints or priests, but to themselves as they mix, stir, grind, and boil. In a village like this, they are not unusual. Every settlement needs someone who knows how to ease a fever, draw the poison from a wound, help a baby find its way safely into the world. And yet, these same people will one day be accused of witchcraft. So how does it happen? How does a healer become a suspect? Let us walk slowly, carefully, into the roots of that suspicion. The Healer's Garden. If you walk beyond the last house at the edge of the village, where the smoke thins and the hedges grow wilder, you will find the Healer's Garden. It is not much to look at in the colder months, just crooked fences and a few stubborn herbs clinging to the earth. But in spring and summer, it comes alive. There is sage for cleansing wounds, yarrow for stopping bleeding, fennel for easing the belly, mint for cooling fevers. Some plants come from far-off lands, brought back along trade routes so tangled that no one in this village could trace them. Others grow wild in the hedgerows, needing only a sharp eye to find them. The healer. Perhaps she is an older woman, her back bent, her hands stained with soil. Knows them all. She knows when to gather the leaves, how long to dry the roots, how to crush the seeds so that they release their hidden power. She has no books. Her knowledge is carried in memory, passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, like a song whose lyrics have changed slightly with each generation, but whose melody remains the same. To most villagers, this knowledge is a blessing, until the day it isn't. The first whispers. It begins, as so many things do, with small misfortunes. A woman takes a potion to ease her labor pains, but the child dies anyway. A farmer feeds his coughing son a tea of boiled herbs, but the fever worsens through the night. Did the healer make a mistake? Or, and here the whispers begin, did she mean for this to happen? Most of the time, no one dares say such things aloud. But humans have always been storytellers, and stories grow best in the shadows of uncertainty. Old Marta talks to her plants, someone mutters by the well. I saw her leave milk out by the crossroads at midnight, another adds. She has too many cats. It is harmless gossip at first. Yet gossip has a way of building on itself, layering suspicion upon suspicion, until it takes on a weight all its own. The church and the hedge. In medieval Europe, the church was both everywhere and not quite everywhere. Priests preached from pulpits, monks copied manuscripts, bishops argued over doctrine. But in the day-to-day life of villages like this one, religion mixed with older, earthier traditions. People might pray to saints in the morning, then tie bits of ribbon to a tree for luck in the afternoon. They might kneel in church on Sunday, then carry a charm of herbs in their pocket the rest of the week. To the church, such practices were always a little suspicious. Not outright heresy, perhaps, but certainly not proper. And so the women who gathered herbs lived at the edge of two worlds. They were needed, respected even, yet also slightly apart. Their gardens were places of healing. But healing that came without prayers or blessings sometimes felt like healing from the wrong source. The problem of power. Another thing about the healers, they had a kind of power. Not political power, not the power of wealth or armies, but the quieter power of being needed. When someone is in pain, they will crawl to anyone who offers relief. When a child is sick, parents will try anything, tea, poultice, whispered charm, if there is even the smallest chance it might help. And yet, power breeds envy. The blacksmith might be the strongest man in the village, but he cannot stop a cough from killing his wife. The priest might command souls on Sunday, but when his sister's childbirth turns dangerous, he will call for the healer just like everyone else. People do not always like to depend on those they do not fully understand. The night gatherers. Many herbs must be gathered at specific times, some before the morning dew dries, others under the full moon when, so the old beliefs say, their strength is greatest. And so, sometimes, the healer walks the fields at night. Perhaps she carries a lantern. Perhaps she works by moonlight alone. The village sleeps while she bends among the plants, muttering to herself, plucking leaves that glisten with silver frost. To her, it is simply the right way to do things. To those who wake in the night and glimpse her figure moving through the fields, it begins to look like something else entirely. The thin line between charm and curse. Healers often gave small charms along with their remedies, words to speak, gestures to make, bits of string to tie in certain ways. These things soothed the mind, if not the body. But the same words, the same gestures, could be twisted by fear. If a fever broke, the healer was thanked. If it worsened, people asked why she spoke those strange words over the pot of steaming herbs, why she drew those signs in the air, why she burned that particular root whose smoke smelled so bitter. The line between helping and harming grew thin indeed. The tipping point. Most of the time, life went on peacefully. The healer gathered her plants. The villagers came to her for remedies. Children grew, couples married, winters passed. But history shows again and again that fear needs only a spark. One bad harvest, one lingering illness, one preacher with a gift for fiery sermons about the devil stalking the earth. And suddenly, the woman who spent her life bringing babies safely into the world might be accused of feeding infants to demons in the woods. It seems absurd to us now, but to people who lived in a world lit only by firelight, where storms and sickness struck without warning, where the night itself felt alive with unseen things, it was not so hard to believe. The quiet before the storm. For now, though, in our 1623 village, things remain calm. The healer tends her garden. She dries her leaves, grinds her roots, mixes her teas. People thank her when she helps them. They glance at her oddly when she walks by, perhaps, but no one speaks too loudly about their doubts. Not yet. Because fear, like weeds, grows slowly before it spreads fast. And soon, though the villagers do not yet know it, the sermons will grow sharper. The laws will grow harsher. The whispers will swell into accusations. And the woman with the herb garden will find herself standing before a judge who has never boiled a root in his life, demanding to know why she walks the fields at night. The sun has set. The last glimmer of gold has faded from the sky, leaving behind only the thin glow of the moon above the rooftops. The village is quieter now. Doors have been bolted. Fires burn low in the hearths. The chickens have settled on their roosts, and the dogs no longer bark at passing strangers because none are coming this way tonight. Darkness changes things. It always has. In the day, life feels open, explained, understandable. You can see the faces of your neighbors. You can watch the fields stretching away under the wind. You can tell yourself the world is ordinary. But when night falls, the ordinary becomes something else. The shape of darkness. For us today, darkness is never complete. We have lamps, headlights, streetlights that hum faintly on every corner. A city from above looks like a sea of stars trapped on the ground. But 400 years ago, night meant something different. There was no glow of distant towns on the horizon, no airplanes blinking red in the sky, no electric bulbs humming faintly in kitchens after midnight. The darkness then was heavy, velvet, thick. It swallowed the edges of houses. It turned the hedges at the edge of the fields into solid walls. It filled the forest beyond with endless unknowns. People lived by firelight, yes, but firelight only reached so far. Beyond it was the dark, and the dark was alive. The forest at night. Every village lay near a forest in those days. That was where the wood came from, the game, the berries and mushrooms. In the daytime, men walked its paths with axes on their shoulders. Children followed to gather fallen branches. Women picked herbs along the clearings. But at night, the forest became another creature entirely. The trees moved when the wind came through. The owls screamed from somewhere high above, their voices carrying in ways no one could quite place. The wolves, yes, there were wolves still then, howled from deep within, and sometimes from much closer than anyone wanted to hear. It is no wonder people told stories about witches meeting under the trees after midnight. When you hear laughter echoing through the dark, far from any fire or house, who can say whether it belongs to a traveler or something else entirely? The witching hour is born. Midnight carried a weight in those times. The hours after dark felt like a separate world, a time when ordinary rules loosened their grip. People prayed before bed not only for their souls, but for protection from things that walked when the sun was gone. Out of this came the idea of the witching hour, that time between midnight and 3 in the morning when witches were said to gather, when the devil himself might walk abroad, when spirits were strongest. Priests preached about it, villagers whispered about it, and slowly, the hour itself became a character in people's minds, an invisible presence that belonged not to God or man, but to darker things. Lantern light and long shadows. Picture a single man walking home from a neighboring village at night. He carries a lantern. Its glow reaches maybe 10 steps ahead of him, no more. Beyond that, only shifting shapes in the dark. The wind moves the hedges along the path. The trees creak like doors opening slowly. A fox screams somewhere in the distance, sounding enough like a child to make him stop and listen. He walks faster. The lantern shakes. The shadows around him seem to twist in ways they didn't when he first lit the candle. By the time he reaches his own door, heart beating a little too quickly, he's already telling himself he saw nothing unusual. And yet, the next morning, someone will hear this story and add a detail. Perhaps there was a figure in the trees, watching. Perhaps it was the old woman from the edge of the village. This is how fear spreads, not with proof, but with possibilities. Dreams and nightmares. Sleep itself was not always a refuge. Without clocks or electric lights, people's nights stretched long, broken sometimes by what was called the watch, a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night when many stirred from sleep before lying down again. In those hours between dreams, the mind played tricks. People spoke of nightmares where witches pressed upon their chests, stealing their breath, of spirits whispering in their ears, of leaving their bodies entirely, flying through the night to strange gatherings beyond the hills. Today, we talk of sleep paralysis, of fever dreams, of overactive imaginations. Back then, these things felt like evidence. The sounds no one could name. In the day, you know what you hear: the blacksmith hammering, children laughing, a cart rolling down the road. At night, sounds lose their edges. A branch falling in the forest might be a footstep. A barn door swinging in the wind might be a voice. People described hearing hooves on rooftops, wings beating against the shutters, laughter outside the windows of those who had angered their neighbors. Some of it was real: owls, rats, the wind. But some of it, perhaps, was not. From fear to accusation. Here is how it happens. A man dreams that someone sits upon his chest at night, stealing his breath. The next day, his cow falls ill. The day after that, his child wakes with a fever. He remembers the dream. He remembers the shadow he thought he saw near his window just before dawn. And then he remembers the woman who muttered to herself in the fields, the one whose herbs sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Soon others come forward with their own stories. The sound of hooves on the roof, a laugh in the woods, a figure by the well at midnight. One by one, coincidences knot themselves into a rope, and someone's neck will be inside it before long. The power of the moon. The moon ruled the night more than the sun ruled the day. Its phases told farmers when to plant, healers when to gather herbs, travelers when to begin a long journey. A full moon gave enough light to walk the roads. A moonless night left the world blind. Witches, people said, loved the full moon best. It lit their meetings, guided their flight across the sky, revealed the faces of those who crept out to join them. Of course, the moon simply kept its own cycle, indifferent to human fears. But in the minds of villagers huddled in fire-lit rooms, watching its pale light slide across their floors, the moon felt like part of the story. The birth of superstition. By now, the ingredients had all gathered. The healer walking at night, the figures glimpsed on the edge of the fields, the dreams that left people shaken, the strange sounds no one could name. The preacher's voice rising in the dark church about the devil prowling after midnight. Each on its own meant little. Together they built a picture people could not quite ignore. A picture of the night as something alive, something watching, something waiting for the hour when decent people slept. Before the storm breaks. And yet, in 1623, in our village, nothing has happened. Not yet. The people still gather by the fire. The healer still dries her herbs. The children still chase one another in the daylight. But the night grows heavier. The stories grow thicker. And somewhere beyond the forest, a man with a pulpit and a voice like thunder is writing a sermon about witches that will set half the country on fire before the century ends. Up until now, we've lingered in the misty calm before the storm, the healer's herbs, the whispering nights, the restless dreams. But history doesn't stay quiet forever. In this chapter, the fear hardens into something far more dangerous. Accusations, trials, judges with pens and soldiers with ropes. Like the earlier sections, this will be written in the slow, atmospheric, sleep-friendly tone you want, rich with historical detail, keeping the Halloween mood but never straying into cheap horror. This chapter will feel like you're sitting beside a crackling fire while someone calmly, steadily tells you how panic and superstition crept from village gossip to courtrooms across Europe. Chapter 4. Trials by Firelight. Witchcraft accusations across Europe. The night is cold. There is frost in the grass, and the moon hangs thin above the rooftops. But the village square is not empty tonight. A crowd has gathered, their breath white in the air, their faces lit by the orange glow of torches. Something is about to happen. Something that will change the lives of everyone here, though most will not realize it until much later. The first accusations. It often began with a single name. One neighbor angry at another. A farmer's cow sickening after it drank from the wrong stream. A child's fever breaking in strange fits through the night. Somebody would speak the words almost carelessly. It's her. It's the old woman with the herbs. And once spoken, the words never went away. Because if the devil truly walked the earth, as priests thundered from their pulpits, then surely he had servants. And why wouldn't they live in villages like this one? Why wouldn't they walk among ordinary people hiding in plain sight? So the first name was spoken, then another, then a dozen more. And soon the firelight spread far beyond this single village. The shadow of the church. By the late Middle Ages and into the 1600s, the church had grown uneasy with anything that smacked of magic, even the harmless kind. Healing charms? Questionable. Astrology? Dangerous. Herbal remedies spoken over with strange words? Potentially demonic. The world, the priests said, was divided between God and the devil, and those who were not clearly with God might be serving his enemy. Sermons grew sharper. Pamphlets appeared warning of witches in every town, meeting at night to plot against Christendom itself. And the villagers, sitting in cold wooden pews on Sunday mornings, listened. They looked sideways at their neighbors. They wondered about the woman with the herb garden, the one who gathered plants at night and muttered over steaming pots. The law steps in. At first, witchcraft trials were rare, scattered things. A single case here, another there. Often they ended quickly. A small fine, a scolding from the priest, nothing more. But then came the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, written in 1487 by two German inquisitors. It claimed witches were real, dangerous, and everywhere. It gave instructions for spotting them, questioning them, punishing them. The book spread like fire through dry grass. Soon, courts across Europe had a guidebook for turning suspicion into conviction. And the trials began in earnest. The Firelight of Trier. One of the largest witch trials in Europe happened in the German city of Trier in the late 1500s. It began with rumors, bad harvests, storms, sickness. People wanted someone to blame. By the time it was over, more than 300 people had been executed. Not just women, men too, priests, children. Whole families disappeared into the flames because someone swore they had seen a figure flying across the moonlight or heard strange laughter near the river at night. It is hard, centuries later, to understand how neighbors could accuse neighbors so easily. But fear is a fast-moving thing. The Pendle Witches. Across the sea in England, 1612 brought the famous Pendle Witch trials. It began, as always, with a quarrel. A traveling peddler refused to sell goods to a poor family near Pendle Hill. Later, he fell ill, and someone claimed witchcraft. By the end, 12 people were arrested. Most were women. All were accused of making pacts with the devil, of sending curses on livestock, of gathering at night for secret rites. The trial records survive today, written in neat ink by men who likely never set foot in the dark fields where these supposed witches lived. One accused woman was said to be so poor she begged for scraps in the streets. Another was nearly blind. The judges called them agents of Satan. The villagers called them witches. And the law believed it. The Salem Echo. Though across an ocean and decades later, the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts would follow the same rhythm. A strange illness in children. Accusations whispered in church pews. A few arrests at first, then dozens. Courts accepting dreams and visions as evidence. By the end, 19 people were hanged. One man pressed to death under heavy stones, hundreds jailed. And yet Salem was not the largest, nor the bloodiest. Europe had already seen entire regions torn apart by witch hunts long before the New World carried the panic westward. Why people believed. It is easy to ask sitting here centuries later. How could they believe these things? But imagine a world without science as we know it. No germ theory, no weather forecasts, no explanation for comets blazing across the night sky or cattle dying overnight in the fields. When the priest said witches caused storms or sickness, many believed it because no one had given them a better reason. Fear rushed in where knowledge had not yet built its walls. The interrogations. The accused rarely stood much chance once the courts grew involved. Some were questioned harshly, even tortured, until they confessed to whatever the judges wanted to hear. Many told wild stories after days without sleep, of flying through the night, of feasts with the devil, of pacts signed in blood. Did they truly believe these things happened? Or did they say them simply to make the pain stop? The court clerks wrote it all down carefully, as though words spoken under duress carried the weight of truth, and the sentences followed swiftly. The gallows and the stake. Not every accused witch was burned at the stake, though many were. Some were hanged. A few, in England, were even drowned. Fire was common because it was seen as both punishment and purification. The flames, people said, would cleanse the sin from the soul even as they consumed the body. The trials were public. Villagers gathered to watch, faces lit by the same fire that claimed the condemned. Some came out of fear, wanting to see proof that justice had been done. Others came because public executions were grimly woven into the fabric of life back then, as ordinary as markets or festivals. But when the fire burned low and the crowd drifted home, the village never quite felt the same again. The spreading panic. From Germany to Scotland, France to Scandinavia, the witch hunts rolled on through the 1500s and 1600s. Some regions saw only a few trials, others saw thousands. Historians estimate tens of thousands of people were executed across Europe in those centuries, most of them women, many of them poor, almost all accused with little more than gossip for evidence. The panic burned hottest where fear, religion, and bad harvests all collided. And when it passed, slowly, unevenly, over decades, villages were left scarred by the memory of neighbors turning on neighbors, of judges nodding solemnly as fires crackled in the square. The silence afterward. When the last torch guttered out, when the final ashes cooled, life went on. The fields were planted again. Children played in the roads again. Sermons turned to other subjects. But in many villages, whole families were gone. Their houses stood empty, doors swinging in the wind. People no longer spoke the names of the accused aloud, not out of respect, out of unease. Because even centuries later, it is hard to look directly at a moment when fear swallowed reason whole. All right, let's dim the lanterns and step into the world of folklore. Chapter 5 will feel a little different. The trials were grim and heavy, but now we drift into the myths, the whispers, the things people believed witches did when no one was watching. The broomsticks, the black cats, the midnight feasts. All of it told in that same slow, atmospheric tone that keeps the listener leaning in while the wind howls softly outside their window. This chapter will stay long form, around 1,800 to 2,000 words when read at a sleepy pace. Perfect for the sleepless historian style you're building toward. Chapter 5. The Witching Hour. Legends, Folklore, and Midnight Superstitions. The fire burns low. The last log shifts with a soft sigh, sending a brief shower of sparks toward the chimney before collapsing into glowing coals. Outside, the wind moves through the hedges, carrying with it the faint cry of some night creature whose name no one agrees on. The hour is late. Midnight has come and gone. This is the hour when the old stories come alive. The world after midnight. Every village had its own tales. They began softly, often told by grandmothers to children who weren't yet sleepy enough to close their eyes. The same stories that warned against wandering into the forest or staying out past dusk also whispered of things that happened after the clock passed midnight. Because in the minds of medieval villagers, the hours after dark belonged to no one. Not to the king in his castle, not to the priest in his chapel, not even to the god whose churches dotted the hillsides. The night was its own kingdom, and witches, people said, were its queens. The Flying Witches. One of the most enduring images was that of witches flying through the night sky on broomsticks. Why brooms? Some historians trace it to simple practicality. A broom was a tool every household had. If you were going to imagine your neighbor secretly soaring through the clouds to a midnight gathering, she might as well ride something she owned already. Others point to stranger roots. Old fertility rituals where villagers leapt through fields with poles or staffs to encourage crops to grow tall. Over centuries, leaping became flying. Staffs became brooms. Harvest magic became witchcraft. Whatever the reason, the picture stuck. By the time the witch trials began, accusations often claimed people had seen dark shapes crossing the moon, women silhouetted against the stars, rushing to some secret meeting where the devil waited with open arms. No proof was ever offered, of course, but proof mattered less than fear. The Witches' Sabbath. And what did witches do at these gatherings? Oh, the stories grew wilder with each retelling. People swore witches met deep in the forest, far from the eyes of decent folk. They danced in circles around fires that burned with green flames. They feasted on stolen crops, toasted with cups of wine handed to them by demons in human form. Some tales claimed the devil himself appeared, cloven-hoofed and horned, sitting on a throne of black stone while the witches bowed before him. Others said he was charming, handsome, speaking softly as he handed out charms and powers in exchange for loyalty. The gatherings always took place at night, always beyond the safety of the village, always just believable enough to make people glance nervously toward the hills after sunset. Black cats and other companions. Then there were the animals. Every witch, people said, had a familiar, a creature sent by the devil to help her with her work. Black cats were the most common, perhaps because they prowled silently through villages at night, their eyes catching the firelight in unsettling ways. Dogs, owls, toads, even pigs appeared in some tales, each said to carry a piece of dark magic in its small, watching body. If a widow owned too many cats, well, people began to wonder why. If a raven perched too often on someone's roof, the whispers grew louder. Animals became spies in the minds of villagers, little messengers between the human world and whatever waited in the shadows beyond it. The power of the evil eye. Not all witchcraft happened at midnight, according to folklore. Some believed witches could curse with nothing more than a glance. The evil eye, they called it. A look of pure malice said to spoil milk, wither crops, sicken children. If someone glared at you in the marketplace and your cow died the next week, was it coincidence or curse? No one could prove it. But once the idea took hold, every misfortune had a pair of eyes attached to it. Charms and counter-charms. Of course, where there were curses, there were protections. Villagers carried bits of iron in their pockets to ward off witches. They nailed horseshoes above doorways, wore sprigs of rowan wood on their clothing, carved strange symbols into the beams above their hearths. The line between religion and superstition blurred easily. People might attend church on Sunday, then bury a jar of salt under their doorstep on Monday to keep witches away. Even priests sometimes handed out blessings for protection that looked suspiciously like the charms they condemned from the pulpit. Fear makes allies of strange things. The shapeshifters. Some tales claimed witches could change shape entirely. One moment, a woman. The next, a hare darting across the fields. A black dog watching from the edge of the woods. A crow perched on the gallows where yesterday's accused still hung. Children were warned not to chase animals at night. Not because of wolves or wild boars, though those were danger enough, but because the creature might not be a creature at all. It might be old Marta from the edge of the village, the one with the herb garden, slipping through the dark in another form. Storm raisers and spellcasters. Some witches, people swore, could call storms from a clear sky. A farmer might watch helplessly as hail flattened his wheat fields and remember that he'd quarreled with a neighbor the week before. A neighbor now accused of muttering strange words near the well at dawn. Sailors told of women who could sink ships with a single curse spoken toward the horizon. Shepherds blamed sudden wolf attacks on witches whistling in the hills. Whenever nature turned cruel, someone claimed to know who had whispered to the wind to make it so. The devil's mark. One of the strangest beliefs to grow from the witch trials was that witches bore a mark somewhere on their bodies. A spot where the devil himself had touched them, kissed them, claimed them. Judges ordered searches. Midwives were sometimes forced to examine the accused from head to toe, looking for moles, scars, birthmarks, anything unusual. A simple freckle could be called the devil's seal. People who had lived ordinary lives for decades suddenly found the geography of their own skin turned into evidence against them. How folklore fed the trials. None of these things, the broomsticks, the black cats, the secret gatherings, were new by the time the great witch trials began. They were old stories, carried across generations like dry leaves drifting from one season to the next. But when the accusations started, these tales hardened into something like proof. Of course she was a witch. Someone saw her talking to a crow at midnight. Of course he called storms. Remember the wind that tore through the valley after he quarreled with the miller? Folklore gave the trials their fuel. Between fear and fascination. And yet, people were fascinated too. The same villagers who feared witches also leaned closer when the stories were told. They wanted to hear about the midnight dances, the whispered spells, the shape-shifting, the secret marks. Fear and curiosity grew together, twining like two vines around the same tree. Even as judges condemned witches to death, artists carved woodcuts of broomstick flights. Ballads were sung about midnight meetings. Pamphlets sold well when they promised tales of dark magic and wild gatherings in the woods. Witches frightened people, but they also captured them. The hour deepens. As the 1600s wore on, the trials slowly began to fade. Enlightenment thinkers started questioning the old beliefs. Some judges grew uneasy with confessions dragged out under torture. Priests shifted their sermons toward other enemies of the faith. But the folklore never quite died. Even when the gallows stood empty, people still nailed horseshoes above their doors. They still whispered about strange lights in the hills after midnight. Children still grew up hearing about black cats with glowing eyes and women flying across the face of the moon. The trials ended. The stories never did. All right, let's peel back the layers. Chapter 6 will shift us gently from the fog of folklore into the clearer, calmer air of history. We've wandered through the myths, the midnight tales, the gallows lit by firelight. Now it's time to understand what was real, what was rumor, and why the witch hunts eventually burned themselves out. I'll keep the sleep-friendly, atmospheric storytelling you want, but we'll begin introducing reflection, perspective, and the slow unraveling of fear as knowledge and reason finally begin to catch up. Like the others, this section will run about 1,800 to 2,000 words when read aloud, keeping the same tone that lets listeners drift between history and dreams. Chapter 6. Unmasking the Witch Craze. Reality versus Myth. The last torch has burned low. The trial records lie silent in church archives, their ink fading on the pages. The gallows are empty now, the ropes gone stiff with disuse. Time has passed, and when people look back, years later, decades later, centuries later, the questions begin. What truly happened here? Were there witches at all, or only frightened neighbors and eager judges? And why did the fire burn so fiercely, only to go out so suddenly? The silence after the storm. When the great waves of witch trials finally began to ebb in the late 1600s and early 1700s, there was no single moment when the panic ended. It faded unevenly, like embers cooling after a long fire. Some regions stopped early. Others kept going, as though reluctant to let go of the fear that had gripped them for so long. But slowly, across Europe, the executions ceased. No more names shouted in courtrooms. No more sermons warning of midnight dances in the woods. No more crowds gathering to watch the flames. And as the years passed, people began to wonder what exactly they had been so afraid of. The numbers tell their story. Historians today estimate that between the 1400s and the 1700s, somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe. Most of them were women. Most were poor, Many were widows, midwives, herbalists, or simply people who lived on the edges of their communities. Some villages lost nearly all their older women during the height of the hunts, women who carried with them the memory of how to plant, how to weave, how to birth children, how to gather herbs for winter fevers. It was not just lives erased, but knowledge too. The myth of the Midnight Coven. When scholars began reviewing trial records centuries later, they found something striking. The wildest stories, the broomsticks, the devil's feasts, the flying through night skies, almost always came from confessions made under torture. Pressed hard enough, people said whatever their interrogators wanted to hear. A woman might first insist she was innocent. Hours later, she might admit to gathering herbs for healing. Under pain, she might confess to meeting the devil in the woods, because that was what the judge kept asking about. The myths, in other words, grew not from the accused themselves, but from the way fear twisted words into weapons. Why it happened. So why did the witch craze erupt when it did? Historians point to several reasons, each weaving into the next like threads in the same dark cloth. Religion and fear of the devil. After centuries of plague, famine, and war, people clung tightly to faith. Priests warned of Satan prowling the earth, eager to snatch souls through his servants. The witches. Social upheaval. The Reformation shattered religious unity across Europe. Wars raged, economies faltered. In uncertain times, people looked for someone to blame. Law and order. Books like the Malleus Maleficarum gave courts a ready-made script for finding and punishing witches. Judges followed it with grim enthusiasm. Old beliefs, pagan customs, herbal medicine, and folk traditions that had survived for centuries were suddenly rebranded as demonic by suspicious authorities. It was a perfect storm. Fear, faith, and misfortune crashing together until the flames rose high. The role of misogyny. One truth becomes clear when you read the records. Most accused witches were women, not queens or noble ladies. Ordinary women, often poor, often widowed, sometimes simply too outspoken, too independent, or too strange for the comfort of their neighbors. A woman who lived alone was suspicious. A woman who owned property after her husband's death was envied. A woman who quarreled with neighbors risked having their next misfortune blamed on her temper. The witch hunts became, in many ways, a way to police the boundaries of what women were allowed to be. The end of the hunts. By the late 1600s, the panic began to weaken. Some judges started demanding stronger evidence than gossip or dreams. Philosophers of the Enlightenment wrote about reason, science, and skepticism. In 1718, Prussia officially outlawed torture in witch trials. Other countries followed. By the 18th century, the last executions flickered out like the dying coals of a long, long fire. The world had not grown kinder overnight, but it had grown, slowly, a little less afraid of the dark. What historians believe now. Today, scholars view the witch craze not as proof of real witches, but as a mirror held up to the fears and tensions of the time. Bad harvest? Blame the neighbor. Strange illness? Blame the midwife, thunderstorm? Blame the woman with too many cats. It was, historians say, a kind of social pressure valve, a way for frightened communities to explain the unexplainable, to find control in a world where life often felt unpredictable and cruel. Witchcraft trials told people the danger could be found and punished, that the world could be made safe again if only the guilty were burned or hanged. But the real dangers, plague, war, hunger, cared nothing for the flames in the village square. Separating the myths from reality. So, were there witches? Not the kind in the pamphlets or woodcuts, flying through the night with the devil at their side. But there were certainly people who practiced folk magic, healing charms, protective spells passed down through families. They were not summoning demons. They were trying to survive, to keep illness away, to help crops grow, to bring luck to marriages and births. What the church called witchcraft, many villagers simply called tradition. The legends that linger. Even after the trials ended, the legends never fully disappeared. People kept telling stories about the woman who could curse with a glance, the black cat watching from the rooftops, the midnight dances in the forest. Today, those same images appear in Halloween decorations, children's books, films, and festivals. The witch, stripped of her gallows and pyres, became a figure of mystery, rebellion, sometimes even humor. What was once a sentence of death slowly transformed into a symbol. Of fear, yes, but also of independence, magic, and the untamed corners of history. Looking back with calm eyes. Centuries later, we can read the trial records without torches in our hands. We can see how gossip turned into accusation, how fear dressed itself as justice, how myth tangled with memory until neighbors watched neighbors burn. And we can see, too, how ordinary it all was. The witch hunts were not the work of madmen or monsters. They were carried out by villagers, priests, and judges who believed, truly believed, they were doing what was right. That may be the most unsettling truth of all. The gallows are empty now. The ashes in the village square have long since blown away on the wind. Where once torches smoked and judges frowned from wooden benches, there are only fields, hedges, and roads winding toward towns that no longer remember the names of the accused. The witch hunts ended. Life went on. But history does not end so easily. It lingers. It waits. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the faint echoes of what happened here, centuries later. The fields grow quiet again. By the mid-17th century, the last witch trials sputtered out across Europe. Villages planted crops where gallows had once stood. Children played on hills where bonfires had burned. The forests where people claimed to see witches dancing in the moonlight grew thick and silent again. The paths through them used only by hunters and shepherds. Time softened the places. The sermons grew quieter. The judges retired. The pamphlets yellowed on their shelves. And the people who had lived through it, those who watched neighbors dragged to court, those who whispered names in the dark, eventually laid down in the same churchyards as the accused, side by side beneath the same grass and stones. The world moved on. The questions left behind. But the questions remained. Why did it happen? Why did so many believe so deeply in things that were never there? And could it happen again? Historians sift through records looking for answers. Psychologists point to the way fear spreads in tight communities, how panic feeds on itself until reason snaps under the weight. But in some ways, the witch hunts resist simple explanations. Because when you read the words left behind, the trial records, the sermons, the confessions scratched out by trembling hands, you realize how ordinary everyone was. The judges were not villains out of stories. The accused were not demons in disguise. The neighbors who whispered suspicions over fences were not cruel by nature. They were people, just people. And that may be the most unsettling part of all. The lanterns burning low. Imagine the last witch trial in some small village in Germany or Scotland or France. The torches have been lit. The crowd has gathered, though smaller than in years past. The priest reads the familiar words. The judge nods. The sentence is carried out. And then, nothing. The villagers drift home. The torches burn low. The wind moves through the square, scattering ash that will be gone by morning. No one says, This was the last one. No one knows that history has quietly closed a door. But it has. The next time the priest preaches, it will be about other sins. The next time the judge sits in court, it will be for disputes over land or cattle or theft. The witch trials end not with a bang, but with a slow, tired fading. Fear changes its shape. Fear does not vanish. It only changes shape. In the centuries after the witch hunts, people found new things to fear. Revolutions, diseases, invading armies, strange new ideas blowing in from across the seas. But the fear of witches, of neighbors secretly plotting with dark powers under the moonlight, slowly loosened its grip. Science offered new explanations for storms and sickness. Philosophy questioned old superstitions. Literature turned witches from real dangers into characters on pages, then into costumes at festivals, then into figures children laughed at on autumn nights. The flames died out, but the stories lived on, changed, softened, tamed. The weight of regret. In some towns, centuries later, plaques were placed where the trials once happened. In memory, they read, "Of those who died here, innocent." Villages apologized for names once shouted in fear. Churches held services for souls condemned by their own ancestors. Time had dulled the panic enough for regret to seep in, like rain through old stone walls. But apologies spoken 200 years too late do not bring back lives lost to gossip, to envy, to sermons that turn suspicion into death sentences. History moves only forward. The echoes in our own time. When people read about the witch hunts today, they often shake their heads. How could anyone believe such things? But look closely at our own age. When disease spreads, when rumors fly, when communities feel threatened, suspicion still leaps like sparks from a fire. People still look for scapegoats. Neighbors still turn on neighbors in times of panic. The gallows are gone. The torches are gone. But the part of human nature that fueled them? That part remains. The myths outlive the trials. And yet, even knowing the history, people still tell the old stories. Every Halloween, children dress as witches with pointed hats and crooked broomsticks. Black cats stretch lazily across fence posts. The moon climbs above quiet fields just as it did centuries ago, silver and silent. The fear is gone mostly. What remains is the fascination, the shiver that runs through old tales told beside fires, the thrill of costumes and candlelit pumpkins. The witch stepped out of the flames and into folklore, into fiction, into fun. Time transformed her from a crime into a character. The last reflection. And so we come back to the village where we began. The houses are dark now. The hearths burn low. The wind moves through the hedges and carries with it no sermons, no accusations, no frightened whispers. The people who once lived here are gone, as all people eventually go. The only witnesses left are the fields, the trees, the stones along the road. And they keep their silence. The quiet end. The last lantern burns low in the square. Somewhere a dog barks once, then settles down again. The moon slides behind a cloud. The world is still. The witch hunts are over. But the stories remain.